As someone who got into the game because of Pendulum, yes, I do believe Electrumite should be banned. This isn't because of the power level of the card itself, it's more to do with what the card represents. In my Pendulum video, I elaborated on the idea that the existence of cards like Electrumite and Beyond the Pendulum are not the Pendulum mechanic's greatest tools. They're in fact its greatest setbacks. Think about it. These are generic links that search any Pendulum monster in the game. To put it into context just how absurd the notion of such a card is, let me make it as obvious as possible. Imagine a generic link to that just said, add one non-Pendulum monster to your hand. That's it. That's the only clause. Do you perhaps see an issue with that? Well, yes, printing a card such as this at this point in the game would be outright insane. This issue isn't exclusive to new cards affecting what already exists. Take a card like Snake Rain, for example. This is a card that reads insanely broken. However, Konami seems to be aware of its existence, and as a result, designs reptile archetypes with the intent that the card does not break the game. This leads to design limitations on the broader card pool. Ogdoadic feels like a deck that would be insane with a card like Snake Rain, yet the deck's power is middling. Almost likely due to the fact Snake Rain exists. And very likely any future reptile archetype is going to restrict design around it. A more infamous and relevant example of this issue would be Halqifibrax, a card that the mere existence of got any tuner with a decent effect on it banned. Halq made it so any tuner that was originally intended for synchro climbing was actually a broken combo piece for link climbing. Konami eventually decided to ban Halq and free his prisoners. However, Electrumite, while banned in the TCG, is legal in the OCG, and therefore, any Pendulum card designed in the future has to account for that fact regardless. Electrumite is a card that presents a similar issue. Beyond just searching any Pendulum, her design is unique in that it plays into Metal Foe's destruction effects to set a card, with her setting a monster in the face-up extra. However, she can put any Pendulum monster from deck into the extra, and since she pops a card on field to add back a card from the extra, you're always going to put Astrograph, as he's an extender that combos extremely well with her, providing not only extension, but fetching another copy of whatever card you blew up. Then, just because, Electrumite lets you draw a card. Electrumite's design hinges on Astrograph to really make it worthwhile, as it's the way you get the most card value, which is Pendulum's biggest concern since you need 2 scales and all the monsters you can muster. While you could ban Astrograph to curb the power of this, that would be missing the forest for the trees. The reality is, any card that can provide a similar utility is going to yield the same results from her. With Halq, it was Glow Up Bulb, then Jet Synchron, then O-Lion. And when you consider the fact Konami refuses to print a Pendulum that doesn't plus in some way when it's destroyed, we don't need to repeat the same song and dance for Pendulum. Or rather, we likely won't, because that would require Konami to actually design more Pendulums. The fact that Electrumite is legal in the OCG, as well as the fact that the game scarcely touches Pendulums as a whole, spells out the writing on the wall. They are content with Pendulum being defined by this card indefinitely. Pendulum as a mechanic has no impetus to grow in their eyes. Pendulum will continue to be viewed as a pile of cards rather than a mechanic because Konami views them that way. Many people want Electrumite back in the TCG because then we at least get to play Pendulum as it exists. But I don't want to play Pendulum that is shackled by stagnation. I want to play a Pendulum that has been freed with innovation. As long as she's legal in any capacity, I've no faith that Konami are going to meaningfully explore Pendulum, and that is something that needs to change. Beyond the Pendulum is a card that just straight up searches any Pendulum with no hoops to jump through, unlike Electrumite. But she's designed in a way that is far more restrictive, and forcing you to Pendulum summon the moment you do the search, lest you be subjected to a self-inflicted Dark Ruler no more, as well as requiring she be in the EMZ to perform the search, preventing you from making any other card you want to stay on the field before making her. Despite being able to search any Pendulum in the game, her restrictions make her hard to use generically in every Pendulum strategy, as she creates a massive choke point. This is good on paper, as it means she would only really have a place in select pendulum strategies that can effectively wield her. But you see, the issue is, there are none. And she is intended to be crucial to the functionality of every pen deck. So, Pendulum is incentivized to cram in as many ways to get her out without using your normal as possible, ultimately ensuring pen decks play one way and suffer for it. The biggest complaint people have with Pendulum is the end board, but for some reason people seem to fail to understand that isn't a fault of the mechanic, but rather Konami's negligence. Boral, Barone, and Apo were penned endboard pieces because Pendulum decks didn't have boss monsters to go into. And when you don't have boss monsters, you have to make do with what's available. And when what's available is generic negates, what do you expect? This happens in Pendulum because there's nothing for them to do. And it happens with decks like Snake Eyes because it's what's bound to happen when you design cards that just vomit onto the field with no rhyme or reason. So in the end, cards like Electrumite and beyond only served as a resilient mechanism for Pendulum to combo into these negates, as they still didn't design them to make a meaningful Pendulum-exclusive boss as an end goal. They made Exceed the Pendulum, which feeds into the idea of link climbing into a Link 4. For the love of God, if you're going to design cards like these, actually make a genuine payoff for them. It's helping no one. Mercifully in the TCG, Boral, Barone, and Apo are all banned now. But because there's a clear negligence for this mechanic, this loss of an artificial game plan still hasn't led to Pendulum being supplemented with a genuine one. The only existing Pendulum boss monster is also a negate, but at least it's actually predicated on the idea of using Pendulum's unique design for a cost. This is something that should have had far more exploration by now, but Konami can't be bothered. Performapal is the archetype that made me truly fall in love with the game. With so many cards that modified attack, it felt like a deck that could solve any board state with some sleight of hand tricks. Provided you used the cards wisely, there was no situation that seemed unwinnable. Of course, when it came to actual meta play of the deck, it was just barfing out material to create generic negates. I wonder if there's some sort of poor design philosophy that remains a prevalent issue in the wider game as a whole. Performapal more recently got Lady Ange and Gentry, a pair of cards with some solid design. They're really cool, but they aren't a win condition, nor did they come with one. One issue Pendulum archetypes have to wrestle with is the fact that there are cards they want as their scales, and cards they settle for as their scales. Gentrude is a card that sort of addresses this design dilemma, being able to scale a Performapal from deck if he's destroyed, but there's no further design that revolves around manipulating the cards you scale. The duo also introduce a questionable design direction for Pendulums. Lady Ange lets you discard herself and another Performapal to draw 2 cards. Her scale effect lets you pitch a Pendulum to make your opponent's monster lose attack. Gentrude can add back to hand from your extra by discarding a Pendulum. Notably, Pendulums don't want to end up in the graveyard, so these two leaning into that calls for a greater design shift to really make use of that design. Which is fine on paper. It's a chance to have the mechanic evolve and diversify its design, but there hasn't been any initiative to follow up on this. Also love that they felt the need to make Lady Ange unable to scale the same turn you use her discard effect, because going -1 instead of 2 from an Ash would be asking for too much in Pendulum. An Ice Synchron can get her back. Months later, they'd print Seer as justification for the 1 effect per turn. If you pen summon Seer in defense, you can send an Odd Eyes or Performapal from your deck to grave, so you can scale Lady Ange. No, wait just a second. What was the clause for this effect again? Oh, right. Pendulum summoned. Who made this? The defense effect lets you set up either Lady Ange or Gentrude, but the card doesn't seem to understand that both of those go out the window in the context of this card's use. While his other effects also lean into the graveyard setup shift, they fail to meaningfully bring it all together. A year after printing this insult, they'd make Valet as a way to foolish her from deck without using your pen summon. But this and Butler being the closing act weren't exactly enough to warrant this design shift either. It still feels as though it's lacking an adequate payoff and any real cohesive playstyle. It has been 3 years since these cards were printed, and we have yet to see anything finish this foundation they started. And Dowsing Fusion certainly isn't any less embarrassing a card for it. As a result, these feel like a bizarre spin-off of Performapal rather than a new direction for it. And when you consider the fact Konami thinks you should still care about Monkey Board, a card that does not work with Gentrude's effect, it's just odd. So Odd Eyes is also a relevant point of discussion for Pendulum as a whole. The fact Yuya's deck is 3 separate Pend archetypes blended together feels as though it's the root of why Konami continues to view Pendulum as a deck rather than a mechanic. This pile view of the archetypes has led to Odd Eyes being neglected, being the most underdeveloped of the 3. Performapal and Magician can function independently pretty competently, but if you try to play Odd Eyes by itself, you realize how bare bones it is. Which is depressing when you consider Odd Eyes is Yuya's ace. An archetype that should have the benefit of feasting on yearly anime legacy support is starved for it. This blend of archetypes leads to multiple conflicts in design, with not all 3 of them being in sync for a shared game plan, as some cards will either only search cards of 1 or 2 of the archetypes, making it so their functionality as a blend is hindered, actively justifying the existence of cards like Electrumite and beyond to just bite the bullet and let you get any without the need to list 3 archetypes on the card. Giving these archetypes independence with room for incidental synergy would be a step in the right direction, shifting away from viewing Pendulum as a whole as a singular deck. The one Yuya-related archetype that is divorced from the others is Supreme King. Supreme King is the closest thing we have to a well-rounded Pen strategy, sticking mostly to its own cards and opting to use a more simple setup with the traps that cheat out Zark for interruption, rather than attempting to combo off forever and build an unbreakable multi-negate board. But this is tied to Zark, a card that was originally meant to be made with the 4 Dimension Dragons. I don't find Zark to be particularly interesting in execution, but it is at least a better mold to follow for the future of Pendulum design, as it actually does in fact use a Pendulum extra deck as its boss monster. Just ignore these cards. It also realizes that Pendulum doesn't have to be solely designed to wombo combo into infinity, a fact that should have been obvious from day one. Even when we ignore the concerns of Pendulum being a pile, Pendulum has a fundamental issue in modern Yu-Gi-Oh's climate. With how prevalent one-card combos are, hand traps are mandatory to compete. Pendulum can't afford to play hand traps. So, realistically, Pendulum's design would have to lean into breaking boards, or having similarly designed one-card combos that snowball into a mountain of advantage. However, a mechanic that intrinsically struggles with card value isn't exactly going to do wonders breaking boards. And when you consider the fact that part of the reason Pendulum is disliked is because they've been designed as combo decks, making insane one-card combos for Pendulum is only going to keep up its poor reputation. There are engines in the game that can help break boards and eat up interruptions, and Pendulum does have some engines, but that once again ends up bringing us back to the concern of the mechanic being a pile of slop, only further cementing the idea that that's their identity. So it leaves Pendulum in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. It's been a long time since I've looked into Pend lists, as the gameplay has persisted at being tedious and boring. So when I decided to look into them for this video, I was disappointed but unsurprised to see every Pendulum deck running super heavy and melodious. It's pretty clear that their inclusion is for their power, not that they provide a unique synergy with the core archetype. This is all not to mention, Pendulum lists that were doing well in Duelist Cup did so by using Majesty Pegasus to search Secret Village. Riveting gameplay. It really feels like Pendulum is in an unwinnable situation. The TCG cited banning Electrumite for the correct reason. Electrumite is an overly centralizing card that ensures Pendulum be the slop that people commonly associate the mechanic as being. However, this sentiment means precious little when there's been absolutely no initiative to push for a positive change for the mechanic without it. We'll always get cards designed under the premise Electrumite is legal if they aren't TCG exclusive. So the effectiveness of the meager Pendulum support we do receive is going to be hindered severely. We have TCG exclusives, and yet None of those opportunities have been used to address how to support and design new pendulum archetypes without Electrumite present. The likely answer is because they just don't care about pendulum, and that's the overarching issue. Cards like Electrumite and beyond serve as these perfect tools for any pendulum deck to use, and as such, they don't feel compelled to make anything new for them, seeing as they're already complete and that any new cards could potentially break them. While Beyond isn't a TCG exclusive, she certainly feels as though she was designed to address pendulum in the context of the TCG. And their answer was simply, print a worse Electrumite. What a wonderful and inspired decision. All she really serves to do is retain pendulum's fundamental issue, all while making the mechanic even weaker. As I said, Beyond's restrictions make her a better fit for Electrumite's role since, while she can search any pendulum, the restrictions make it so only a select few strategies could really take advantage of that. But for said strategies to actually exist in the first place, Konami would have to actually ban Electrumite in the OCG and prove they want to take these cards in a meaningful new direction. In the TCG, we're left with only two options for pendulum at present. Pray the TCG has a change of heart and actually starts exploring pendulum design space with its exclusives, something they haven't shown an interest in doing for years, or settle for the mechanic's existing stagnant form and beg for Electrumite's return. Neither of these options are healthy. As I said, Electrumite's continued legality in the OCG won't change the future of pendulum, and that's what's most important. If she's not banned, the only thing we can hope for is TCG exclusive pendulums. I was a little optimistic about this notion because we received the TCG exclusive Volmina statue, but this was a single card and it wasn't designed to actually address pendulum itself. It was more so designed as support for a sprite trap deck that doesn't exist in the main game, debuting alongside Kuabiko and Magicaloidal Soul. If this wasn't the only time the TCG designed a pendulum, I'd actually find it novel. But since it's the only thing we've gotten, and it's meant to support this weird lineup of cards, it's just a letdown. Unrelated, but they made Volmina an SR in Master Duel. NR is the one place this card could have thrived, and Konami made sure it couldn't even do that. Lovely. So, with all this seemingly hopeless talk about Pendulum's current position in the game, what is there that can even be done at this point? How do we go about readapting Pendulum to the modern era, all while building a foundation that breaks the accepted idea that the mechanic is a pile? If not banning Electrumite, they could errata her to only dump a Metal Foes from deck. The not once per turn part is funny though. She can keep that. This change makes her generic materials a boon to Metal Foes rather than making her a boon to every Pendulum deck. It would be a genuine improvement to the card's existence in the game's ecosystem. The fact she's generic to make with Pendulums leans more into building a deck based on genuine synergy, as her payoff would solely be with a deck that contains Metal Foes at its core. But that would also mean Konami actually prints support for the archetype itself. And well, when they're perfectly fine with it being legal in the OCG with its existing text, I don't think that's happening. Also, people hate erratas, so they just complain about it regardless. But what does an Electrumite-free future hold for Pendulum? Super Heavy and Melodious use specific scales that make up a robust and compact engine. The issue is that these are rather too generically good. I'd like to see more engines like them, but actually designed to lean into more niche Pendulum interactions. Lady Ainge, Gentrude, and more importantly, Odd-Eye Synchron's interactions with a Grave opens up room for designing an engine that focuses on Pendulums and Grave, either by setting up Odd-Eye Synchron or by having beneficial Grave effects. Valmonica's design is almost just that. The scales discard a card to scale both it and the opposite card from deck. The deck didn't even release with a card that it could get away with discarding. The face of the deck wasn't even there at debut. Lovely. It was only recently that they gave them a card you actually want to discard. If they print more Pendulums designed with benefits and Grave, that can introduce running Valmonica as an engine in Pendulum decks that actually interact with the Grave. And when you consider how small the archetype is, it's almost as if there's supposed to be one. But that's a different topic for a different video. This could finally justify the existence of Dowsing Fusion, or even lean into the interaction between Xyz and Pendulum, considering the fact Valmonica is only intending to summon 4s. The Amazonas pendulums nicely address the interaction between fusing pendulums in hand. It's just a shame they don't also address the issue with being Amazonas. Getting more value out of pendulums that were fused from hand or used for XCs should be something Konami starts paying attention to. Other than all the interactions with the summoning mechanics, they could start designing pendulum hand traps that discard for cost, but allow for you to scale them from grave during your turn, leaning into game context and allowing for you to scale them if your opponent has more cards than you, addressing the inherent issues pendulum faces when going second, while also making sure they remain less combo-oriented going first. If they account for odd-eye synchron specifically with their levels, they have the versatility to be scales or a link to off of synchron's effect. Ideally designing these cards not just as hand traps but for pendulum, but also cards that can only uniquely be used in pendulum, a benefit Psyframes did not have. Pendulum hand traps could also always place themselves in the extra face up for cost instead as well. Having these two types of pendulum hand traps established makes it so certain pendulum archetypes have way more use for one or the other, helping pendulum decks boost their power in the game's landscape while also prioritizing diversifying the cards you play. Other than catching up Pendulum's main design, we do still have to put way more emphasis on pendulum-oriented boss monsters. Odd-Eye's Absolute is an Omni-Negate that shuffles back a pendulum from the extra for cost. Designing more cards that use the face-up extra deck as a resource cost for their effects is something that makes these cards wholly unique to Pendulum, keeping them from going in every single deck in the game. And instead of the boring and trite design of negates, it could be something like shuffling back any number of cards, then popping cards on the field equal to the number shuffled back. In my video on spirits, I talked about pendulum spirits that bounce your face-up extra to hand at end phase, utilizing this design to restore Pendulum's comeback-like design for Master Rule 3, while also ensuring that it's not incidentally attached to slamming down a ton of bodies for the sake of extending the length of combo slop gameplay that we want to be doing away with. This also feeds into another issue with pendulum monsters that needs to be addressed. Other than the lacking extra deck pendulum bosses, there aren't really pendulum monsters with worthwhile effects in general. There is no reason to leave 99% of these cards on field because they're going to be doing absolutely nothing during your opponent's turn. If they design pendulums with actual interactive hand effects, the hypothetical end phase bounce gives a select few cards with hand effects a use. But of course, I'd rather see them design pendulum monsters with good effects on field. You really made Kirin and then were too terrified to ever print a good effect on a pendulum ever again. Well, there's also Endymion and Jackal King, who are negates. Gee, I wonder if there's some sort of constant sabotage to the design of these cards or something. I just can't put my finger on it. Valmonica takes a very unique approach to limiting how generic it can be in the context of Pendulum as a whole, opting to make an archetype that can consistently scale, but its scales are 3 and 5, so you can only Pendulum summon 4s. This is one way to design modern Pendulum archetypes, designing them with the intent to make them more limited in what they can include, helping to individualize their design, with their Link ones being completely generic, but requiring you actually play the deck to make them. Now if only Valmonica wasn't a microscopic archetype dependent on activating multiple of its non-pendulums to function. Scale manipulation is another underutilized facet of Pendulum. There are individual cards that let you change scales, but these are all bad because they're cards designed to do that and nothing else. Add to the fact they're unsearchable, they've just never been worth using to begin with. A focus on scale manipulation doesn't necessarily need to revolve around allowing new levels to be pendulum summoned. They can be designed in a way similar to Sulfachord, gaining certain effects with specific scales, potentially serving as a unique way to implement control effects, all while using the idea of awkward scales to dissuade the use of dumping them into every pendulum deck under the sun. Scales could also have more meaning beyond just what levels you're allowed to pendulum summon, designing scales with effects to change the level of monsters you control to their scale. This could be an interesting design premise for an XE's pendulum strategy, and if their XE's are really good and require a card from the archetype, but none of the monsters are inherently the matching level, it makes it so you need to actually be playing the deck to utilize them. And there can also be XE's you're meant to make with their inherent levels, making note of this fact and deciding which ranks have which utility for the deck, ensuring the deck can still operate if something were to prevent the scale level gimmick. There are so many ways to use Pendulum's intrinsic design to not only set up unique gimmicks for archetypes, but also establish a strong restriction that helps balance them out of being too generic. All it takes is seeing the through line. There's also the fact that Pendulums don't even necessarily need to be used for a dedicated Pendulum deck. The versatility in a card being a Pendulum can be enough for a unique design in general. More archetypes like Nemlaria, but actually given more effort to function. There's so much room for unique design exploration with Pendulum, and Konami is just willfully sealing the door to it. Should the day ever come that Electrumite is gone for good, that door will open. But as long as she's still there, I think it's pretty clear Konami has no interest in the future of Pendulum, and that fact should bother everyone. Because squandering the potential of any mechanic in this game, especially a main one, is failing the game as a whole. We don't need to free Electrumite. We need to free Pendulum.